So wait, you're telling me that the Gogiteth is this large spider-like monstrosity covered in eyes, and it makes this like horrible, sickening popping noise everywhere it goes, and this is a creature that specializes in ambushes. It loves to like rush out of the dark, grab creatures, and then just drag them away screaming into the darkness. How could this creature get any worse? No. You're telling me they're pack hunters too? Paizo, one of your employees, I got some questions. Today, we're going to talk about the Gogiteth for Pathfinder 2nd Edition on today's episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Happy Halloween, travelers and tourists. My name is Mark, and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller that's really wondering if we have to do the I Want One section for today's video. I mean, really? Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and welcome back to my Creature Feature series, highlighting some of the fun and entertaining monsters that Paizo has published for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And hopefully here soon I'll get to add some Starfinder 2e as well. This series is basically a nod to all of the things I have to tell my players they can't adopt in-game, and in honor of Halloween, I can't think of a better creature to feature on the Creature Feature series than the monstrosity ripped straight from my nightmares, the Gogiteth. The TLDR for this creature is pretty simple to explain. Gogiteths are ambush-style hunters, aberrations that live deep in the Darklands, and packs of these creatures are known to terrorize all sorts of communities, as they literally specialize in just grabbing creatures and dragging them off into the darkness so that they can feast upon them. You could not pick a better monster for a horror movie, and if you are looking for a Halloween-themed session for your Pathfinder 2e game, the Gogiteth is a great creature that you could feature for such a game. So, today we're going to take a look at this creature. We're going to talk a little bit about the lore surrounding this creature, we're going to talk about some of the abilities that this creature has, and we're going to talk about how storytellers can make use of a Gogiteth in one of their games. Finally, to wrap this video up, in all of my Creature Feature videos, I do a section called I Want One, which is a discussion of some options that you can use when one of the players at your table inevitably says those terrifying words, I want one. How can you go about doing that? And honestly, if one of your players says, I want one to a Gogiteth, you might consider making a referral. Now, the majority of this video is geared primarily towards Game Masters. If you are a player, and especially if you're a player who's never had to fight a Gogiteth, I strongly recommend that you skip over the second and third sections of this video, where I talk about the abilities and kind of story uses of the Gogiteth. This is a creature that is a lot of fun in some of the most terrible ways possible, and I would really hate for this creature to be spoiled if you've never had to deal with one. But the first section, talking a little bit about the lore, and the last section, the I Want One, will have some suggestions that players might be able to take advantage of. So if you're a player that's interested in this creature, feel free to watch the first section and then skip over to the final section, because you may find that portion interesting. Still, with all that out of the way, let's get started. Alright, so up first, let's talk a little bit about what the Gogiteth is mechanically, and a little bit of the lore surrounding the Gogiteth. The Gogiteth is, at least as far as I'm aware, a Paizo exclusive monster. I don't think I've seen this particular creature in any other game. At the very least, Paizo has definitely taken advantage of this creature the most. You can find the Gogiteth on page 177 of the Monster Core rulebook. The Gogiteth is a level 12 creature, and as I've previously discussed, it specializes in ambush tactics. Kind of like a giant creepy hunting spider. And if all of that wasn't terrifying enough for you, the book War of Immortals introduces a mythic Gogiteth. This is again a 12th level creature building off of the base Gogiteth, but with the mythic ambusher build attached to it, allowing you to make this creature even more dangerous and cunning inside of battle. So if you need a large, terrifying spider creature to torment things inside of a Pathfinder game, the Gogiteth or Mythic Gogiteth are both fantastic options. But what lore surrounds the Gogiteth? Well, to be honest, there's not a lot here. Paizo has hinted at some possibilities around the Gogiteth, but really all we know about these creatures for sure is that they are known as a menace to the Darklands. For those societies that live deep below the surface of Golarion, an infestation of Gogiteths is something that serves as a real threat to any sort of community. And the Gogiteths aren't that particular about what sort of creatures they're willing to capture and eat. All sorts of beings that live in Sakvaroth or Orv have been known to set aside their differences, even their conflicts with each other, in order to clear out an infestation of Gogiteths, because these creatures are so hostile and so dangerous. And as I've already alluded to in this video, where there is one Gogiteth, there is definitely more of them. Therefore, when you talk about a lair of a Gogiteth, you're talking about a lair of creatures, plural, that are hungering for flesh and definitely need to be taken care of. But where do the Gogiteths come from? That particular question, Paizo has not taken the time to give a definitive answer to. They allude to a few different possibilities. One notable option that is mentioned is that the Gogiteths might be the result of some kind of terrible flesh-warping experiment, that these are essentially creatures that escaped and now infest the Darklands, having freed themselves from their creators. Another possibility that is mentioned is that Gogiteth are not originally from Golarion, that they are possibly some sort of interstellar creature, possibly associated with the Dominion of the Black. Exactly how the Gogiteth came to Golarion in that scenario is not known, but the idea is that as creatures comfortable in the dark recesses of space, that when they came to Golarion, they naturally migrated below the surface as a way of avoiding the sunlight. So we don't have a lot of details about where the Gogiteth come from. Are they failed experiments from Golarion? Are they alien creatures from somewhere outside of Golarion? We don't know for sure, but we do know that they've taken up residence in the Darklands. We get a little bit more speculative information about the Gogiteth in the book War of Immortals when it talks about the mythic variation of the Gogiteth, mentioning that the most likely source of the mythic version of this creature would be essentially as dark jokes of vile gods. Take any sort of evil divine entity that maybe naturally calls the Darklands its home, and add in creepy spider creature, and it's quite possible that a vile god somewhere imparted a little bit of power as a way of just inflicting more terror upon the world. Another possibility mentioned in War of Immortals is that maybe some of Gorum's blood that rained down on Golarion during that event, maybe some of that seeped into the Darklands, and a particular infestation of the Gogiteth may have been infused with the divine essence of that dying god. Regardless of where they come from, regardless of how they got their mythic upgrade if you're using that variant, one thing we know for sure is the Gogiteth are masterful hunters, and they are an incredibly creepy and dangerous threat that player characters might have to deal with. So now what I want to do is I want to move into part 2 of this video and take a closer mechanical look at some of the abilities of the Gogiteth, And then in part 3, we'll talk about how storytellers can make good use of this creature. As I've said, if you are a player in Pathfinder 2e and you don't want the Gogiteth to be spoiled for you, I would jump down to the video description. I'll have some timestamps. Part 4 is labeled I Want One. You can jump ahead to that section, and that will allow you to avoid some spoilers on this creature. I think the Gogiteth is a lot of very terrifying fun, so if you haven't had to deal with one of these, I would really skip the mechanical discussion. I don't want to spoil that for you. But for the game masters who aren't afraid to go all in on spider body horror, let's dive in. So as I previously mentioned, the Gogiteth is a large-size aberration, creature level 12. Both the base creature and the mythic variant are creature 12, so they are intended for 12th level parties. And the Gogiteth comes with an array of abilities that are ultimately very simple and very focused on the ambush style of predator. In other words, the ideal encounter with the Gogiteth, I'll go ahead and tell you, is one where the players don't see it coming, don't have a lot of time to react, and ultimately are scrambling to recover once this creature has struck. First off, let's get a few basic abilities out of the way. The Gogiteth is going to come with a climb speed. This is an underground creature that is used to moving along walls and ceilings and that kind of things. You want to think of all the different places that a Gogiteth might be scurrying and hiding when using it inside of an encounter. And the Gogiteth is going to come with Dark Vision and All-Around Vision as basic abilities. Dark Vision's not a surprise. This is a monster from the Darklands. You expect that. All-Around Vision, the multitude of eyes covering this creature, means that the Gogiteth cannot be flanked. This is something important to realize about the design of the Gogiteth. This is a creature that is meant to get the drop on PCs, not for PCs to get the drop on it. Properly surprising a Gogiteth should be hard, and surprising your players with the Gogiteth is kind of the order of the day. So in terms of the base abilities, you should already see that with its use of climb speed and all-around vision, this is very much an ambush predator in terms of how you want to use it inside of the game. Now, in terms of more specific abilities, the Gogiteth is going to come with some basic attacks. It's going to have a jaw attack and a leg attack, and that jaw attack is going to come with improved grab. Additionally, the Gogiteth has an ability called Skittering Reposition and another 2-action ability called Skittering Assault. Finally, it has an ability called Carry Off Prey, and all of these abilities really tie together into a very tight package where the Gogiteth specializes in running in, grabbing someone, and then carrying them off before the rest of the party has a chance to respond. So let's talk about that. As I said, the Gogiteth comes with 2 basic attacks, a jaw strike and a leg strike. The leg strike is a fairly straightforward attack for the monster, not a lot special to go over there, but the jaw strike is going to come with the improved grab universal ability. If you look up improved grab, as a free action after hitting something with its jaws, the Gogiteth can attempt to grab it. Make an athletics check and pull the creature into its mouth. I forgot to mention this a second ago, the Gogiteth also comes with Constrict, so yes, the Gogiteth can definitely constrict the creature that it's chomping down on. But the real threat here is actually the ability Carry Off Prey. If a Gogiteth has a creature in its mouth, whenever the Gogiteth moves, it just automatically brings that creature with it. That means if a Gogiteth gets a hold of something, it can just begin running off with whatever it has, and it doesn't have to use extra actions in order to drag the victim along with it. That is an important part of this creature. Once it has you in its jaws, it's going to take you wherever it wants to go. Up next, we have the ability Skittering Assault. This is a 2-action activity that comes with some absolutely incredible action economy. When using Skittering Assault, the Gogiteth strides 3 times and once during each of those strides, it gets to make a leg strike at some creature that it can reach during that stride. Now, each of these 3 strikes must be against different creatures, so this isn't going to be an ability that allows the Gogiteth to really pile the damage on one opponent. It's more of a, I'm going to run away and I'm going to injure you all as I'm going kind of thing. But 2 actions, 3 strides is already incredible action economy, and the fact that the Gogiteth can potentially injure up to 3 other targets as it's dragging someone away, that is a pretty serious threat. Now, honestly, in a straight-up fight, the Gogiteth is probably not going to do very well against multiple opponents. It can constrict the person that's in its mouth, but because Skittering Assault is more of a hit several people at once kind of thing, the Gogiteth tends to scatter a lot of damage around, and as a result doesn't do well if it's being swarmed by multiple opponents. But that is where the all-important reaction Skittering Reposition comes in. If an enemy gets too close to the Gogiteth, it just gets to keep moving. As a reaction, it goes further away. All of this together should paint a very clear picture. The goal of the Gogiteth is very simple. It's not there for a long, sustained fight. The Gogiteth wants to find a target, focus on that target, latch onto that target, and drag them off screaming into the darkness, leaving the allies of said target injured and scrambling trying to catch up and hopefully save their friend who just disappeared into the night. Gogiteth are very clearly intended to be ambush monsters, and that goes into the Mythic Ambusher variant that we talked about from War of Immortals. Now, the Mythic version of monsters is actually not a lot more complicated than the base version. Mythic monsters get some Mythic points to spend, they get Mythic skill options. That's going to potentially let them make athletics and stealth rolls at Mythic proficiency, because they need that. Seriously, someone at Paizo, I'm a little worried. Impressed, but worried. And then the Gogiteth can also spend a Mythic point to end a condition that's affecting it. The biggest change for a Mythic Ambusher is something called Hazard Immunity, which basically says that in any area the Gogiteth considers to be its lair, the Gogiteth is naturally immune to any hazard in that space. And that is going to come back here in a moment. For now, I just want to say that the Mythic variant doesn't add a lot to this monster, but it does help highlight some good things about how to use this monster if you're a storyteller. So let's move on to section 3. How should you use a Gogiteth if you're a storyteller? What's the best way to get the most out of this creature? And, as should already be pretty evident, the Gogiteth is intended to be an ambush predator. That's how you should use them. If you are using a Gogiteth in a straight-up fight, it's going to lose a lot of its punch, and so if you really want to get the most thematically out of this creature, you kind of need to make it into a horror movie monster. It needs to be tracking your players, it needs to be hunting them and striking at just the right moment, and ideally dragging someone off into the darkness. But that actually brings up what may be one of the greatest problems with using the Gogiteth in a Pathfinder 2e game. And that is, Gogiteths don't fight fair, and it's very likely if you're using a Gogiteth correctly, the victim of that Gogiteth is likely to feel very cheated when their character inevitably gets horribly murdered. Gogiteth tactics are very obviously focused on one thing. Hit when the party's not looking, grab one particular victim, preferably one that can't fight back very well, sorry to the party wizard, and drag that character off into the darkness. Gogiteths are meant to move very quickly, meaning that once it has its prey, it can make an escape very, very fast, and if players don't react almost perfectly to this sort of assault, the likelihood of a PC being grabbed and drugged just completely out of range of the rest of the party is very, very high. Consequently, you would then have this one PC who is grappled, probably constricted, and definitely at a tactical disadvantage, being munched on by a terrible spider creature, and with no hope of a rescue from their friends. It's very easy to see a Gogiteth feeling pretty bad for a player that's on the wrong end of one. And that's why, if you're a storyteller who wants to use one of these creatures, I want to recommend a slightly different type of story to go with a Gogiteth, and this is something hinted at by the mythic version of the creature, and that is the escape the lair scenario. We've already mentioned that Gogiteth tend to be pack-hunting creatures, and if one horribly efficient ambush predator is bad enough, the idea of multiple horribly efficient ambush predators is really something that can feel very unfair if you aren't careful on how you use it, but you can actually use that to set up some pretty interesting survival horror scenarios that could play really, really well for a one-shot Halloween game or something like that. Imagine for a moment a group of PCs captured by a swarm of Gogiteth and dumped in the middle of a Gogiteth lair where the intention is for the PCs to be hunted by baby Gogiteth who need to feed. This is a nightmare scenario, and you could have a ton of fun while not necessarily leaving your players feeling cheated. Players that have to navigate a nightmare underground cavern and avoid a bunch of baby spider monsters before ultimately fighting the mother spider monster in order to escape, that could be an absolutely fantastic scenario, and I think that it would be better received by most players. If you have a group that is very tactically minded, and if you have a group that would respond well, the standard ambush scenario with a Gogiteth could also play out very well. I encourage you to be careful with that, because the way Gogiteth are intended to be used, it could feel very unfair if one person gets drug off and killed before the other PCs even get a proper chance to react. But the bundled up and thrown in a lair scenario, that has all sorts of potential, and I think that that's something that a lot of groups could have a ton of fun with. So if you're a storyteller who's interested in using a Gogiteth in your campaign, that's something that I would consider. Think about having your players captured and dropped in the middle of a Gogiteth nest, and them having to find some way to escape the lair, possibly by fighting their way through the mother of the nest in order to make their escape. But okay, we've talked about what the Gogiteth is, what its abilities are, how you might use a Gogiteth in one of your stories. Now the time has come to answer the question that really just scars my soul to even consider. What do you do as a storyteller when one of your players inevitably says, "I want one"? Listen, we know that those players are out there. Morgan, if you're watching this video, stop getting ideas. You always have that one person at the table that sees these terrible monstrosities in a game and says, "Aw, I want one." And they start trying to figure out some way to adopt whatever random creature you've thrown at them. And as much as I wish it weren't true, I guarantee you there's going to be someone out there that wants to know how to adopt their very own baby Gogiteth. So, as a GM, what do you do after, of course, making all of the necessary therapeutic referrals? You can kind of split this conversation into two parts. One is magically accessing a Gogiteth, and the other is having access to a pet Gogiteth. So let's start with the magic, because this is a little bit more straightforward. As Gogiteths have the aberration creature type, they can be summoned by the spell Summon Entity, which is a summon spell that can be found on the Occult Tradition list. In particular, A 9th level summon entity spell can summon up to a 13th level creature, and at creature level 12, that means that the Gogiteth is in fact a legitimate option. So, continuing this channel's long-standing question about are the bards in this system okay, a bard can burn a 9th level spell slot in order to summon a Gogiteth into battle. Also, if you happen to be a cleric to Nyarlathotep, you can potentially add the summon entity spell to your spell list as well, also giving a limited subsection of divine casters access to this creature. Now, the summon entity spell, as with most summon spells, is a temporary access sort of thing. You have the creature for a temporary period of time, you call it to the battlefield, it helps out for a bit, and then it leaves. If you want the creature to stick around a little bit longer, you would have to look into ritual magic that could bind a Gogiteth to your service. Now, I don't believe that there is a specific ritual for binding aberrations in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, at least not yet. However, if you scale it off other similar rituals inside of the game, you would be looking at the equivalent of a 10th level ritual that could summon and bind a Gogiteth to your service if you were so inclined. So, if you're interested in gaining the services of Gogiteth, you're looking at incredibly high-level, powerful ritual magic, most likely tied to the legendary occultism skill. But while summon entity and ritual magic could potentially gain temporary or even long-standing access to a Gogiteth, the problem with both of those options is you're waiting until incredibly high level, levels 18, 19, or 20. What if you want a baby Gogiteth? What if you want a pet Gogiteth to follow you around? Again, why? But this is where it's going to get a little bit trickier, because of the 3 major ways to access a pet in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, none of them are really set up to give you access to a Gogiteth or something like that. First off, familiars do not scale at all to what a Gogiteth is intended to do, so unless you just want something that looks like a very small Gogiteth but otherwise really doesn't function like one, familiar is pretty much out of the question. However, if you're interested in a Gogiteth as an animal companion or an eidolon, I do think there are some things that you could potentially reflavor and get something a little bit closer to what the player might desire. Now, let me be clear, there are no animal companions with the aberration type. There is no Gogiteth animal companion in the game. And, thus far, Paizo has not published any aberration summoner eidolons. So, for both of these, strictly speaking, there is not an option, but if a player and a GM wanted to negotiate a compromise, I do have some suggestions. If you want to go the animal companion route, basically what you would want to do is look through the animal companions that exist and find something that is mechanically close to what a Gogiteth is intended to do or be, and personally I found 3 that I think could reasonably be reflavored. That would be number 1, the Cave Gecko, which comes with a tongue pull ability that could kind of imitate the whole, like, grabbing something and holding onto it with its mouth. That could possibly work. There's also the Shadow Hound, which has a Bray ability that creates an AoE fear effect. Gogiteths aren't specifically described as having an AoE fear, but honestly they probably deserve one, so the Shadow Hound could work as a base. And then finally, the Shortalasu animal companion has an ability called Telepathic Pounce that could kind of mimic the ambush combat style that the Gogiteth is intended to have. So, if someone wanted to take an animal companion class like the Ranger, the Druid, or the Beastmaster archetype and play around with the traits and the descriptions and do some reflavoring, I think you could take any of those 3 creatures and make a reasonable facsimile of the Gogiteth, giving your PC the most questionable animal companion humanly imaginable. What about the Summoner? Well, again, we're going to kind of go the beast route and take a look at the beast Eidolon. The beast Eidolon can potentially access the abilities Beast Charge, Primal Roar, and Whirlwind Maul. And again, these three abilities taken together kind of mimic the combat style that the Gogiteth is intended to go for. So I feel like you could build out a Beast Eidolon, use those normal building rules, and maybe reflavor the abilities just very slightly, and you could make a creature that mimics the Gogiteth in an effective fashion. A little bit of reflavoring would go a long way here. Now, because of the fact that the Gogiteth is an aberration, and because aberrations are tied to the summon entity spell on the occult spell list, if you went this route, if you wanted a summoner with their own Gogiteth Eidolon, I would recommend using the Beast Eidolon build, but giving the summoner the occult spell tradition instead, because nobody who's summoning a Gogiteth has any tie to the primal nature around them. Let's just be honest about that. But mechanically speaking, I think that would be a decent representation, and would allow you to kind of mimic what a player might be going for if that was their request. So those are some suggestions for what you can do as a storyteller if one of your players inevitably looks at the Gogiteth and says, I want one for whatever reason. But that's all I've got for you today, so the time has come to turn the conversation over to you. What are your thoughts about the Gogiteth? Have you used one in one of your games? Have you fought one in one of your games? And what was the experience like? If you're a storyteller, do you have any advice on how to use a Gogiteth well? And was there anything that I missed in their abilities that you feel needs to be pointed out? Finally, do you have any other suggestions for what to do when one of your players says, I want one? Jump down to the comments section and let me know. While you're there, don't forget to do all the other stuff that helps support this channel. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can check out my free Discord and my Patreon. All of that will be linked in the video description. But, as always, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of the conversation. Happy Halloween.